Hello and welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, a weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm Jay Frost. We'll start, as always, with the top 5 gifts of the week and look at the headlines shaping the philanthropic landscape. Then I'll be joined by Ruthie, Giles, author of Prospect Management, The Essential Guide, for a deep dive into best practices and new thinking in prospect management, a key to fundraising. Let's get started. Here are this week's top gifts, 9 in all, thanks to a 5-way tie. And as always, we'll count our way up from the bottom to the top. At number 5, the 5-way tie for $10 million. First, the Jenkins Foundation, giving to Tampa General Hospital in Florida, funding a new hybrid operating room, integrating imaging and surgical technologies to treat complex surgical and vascular cases. Next, again at $10 million, the McMillan family, Doug and Shelley McMillan, have given the University of Arkansas, Walton College, $10 million to endow the McMillan Innovation Studio, advancing student-driven innovation and entrepreneurship. Again, at the same level, Bruce and Bernadine Lakefield have given $10 million to the U.S. Naval Academy in Maryland to support the Lakefield Pavilion at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium, expanding event capacity and enhancing the fan experience. Next, Dick Wolf has made a gift of $10 million, once again, to Mount Desert Island Hospital in Maine. This is the lead gift for the Building Our Future campaign, nearly doubling the ER, upgrading surgical suites, and adding new diagnostic capacity for the hospital. And certainly not least, and at the same amount, the estate of Lee Jane Whiteman have made their contribution of $10 million to the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign to preserve and renovate the university's historic round barns, a symbol of Illinois' agricultural legacy. Now, moving up the list. Number 4 this week was a $13 million bequest from the estate of Julius W. Davidson to Samford University in Alabama, one of the largest gifts in the school's history, supporting its mission and future students. At number 3, $30 million from the Seeley and Smith Foundation was awarded to the University of Texas Medical Branch to create the Seeley Heart and Vascular Institute and launch a department of cardiovascular medicine, advancing care, research, and education. At number 2 this week, an estate gift of $35 million from the late Fred and Ruth Waugh to Vanguard University in California, the largest single gift in the school's 105-year history, which will grow its endowment and strengthen scholarships and academic programs. And number 1 this week, $180 million US from Shmuel and Annette Harlap to the Rabin Medical Center in Israel. It's the largest gift ever to an Israeli hospital and will fund the Hope Tower, a 15-story cardiology and neurology center set to open in 2027 and double inpatient capacity. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? It's almost certain that we have. Let us know about the gifts occurring in your world by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email at j@donorsearch.net. If you're with us live, you'll see that in the chat. Now for the top news this week, and there's plenty of it. According to Philanthropy News Digest, Vanguard Charitable reports that in its fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, its donor-advised funds awarded more than $3.5 billion in grants, a 14% increase from the prior year. The organization processed nearly 248,000 grants in that period, benefiting approximately 63,000 nonprofits across sectors such as education, health, human services, and the environment. More than half of those grants were unrestricted, giving nonprofits flexibility in applying the funds to their priorities. Vanguard charitable leaders have noted that these figures highlight how donor-advised funds are increasingly being used as active philanthropic vehicles and not just tax planning tools. The trend points to the growing influence of DAFs in shaping nonprofit funding strategies. A new report from the Science Philanthropy Alliance shows that private donors now contribute nearly 40% of all U.S. basic science funding, up sharply from under 20% in the 1960s. Meanwhile, federal support has fallen from more than 75% to about half. The report says this shift has made philanthropy an essential component of research funding, but also highlights the risks that come with over-reliance on market-driven giving patterns. Researchers warn that while philanthropy is filling a critical gap, projects that depend heavily on private donors could face instability as priorities or economic conditions change. The report calls for closer collaboration among universities, federal agencies, and private funders to create more resilient systems for supporting science over the long term. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has decided to end its relationship with Arabella Advisors, a firm known for its donor-advised fund management and connections to progressive nonprofit networks. Internal communications cited by Philanthropy News Digest say the decision was motivated by a desire to work with partners perceived as politically neutral, helping preserve the foundation's nonpartisan standing. Arabella has become one of the most prominent intermediaries in philanthropy, and this move reflects a wider trend of large funders re-examining partnerships in an effort to avoid reputational risks and political entanglement. The Council on Foundations and Common Fund have released data showing that foundations' endowments earned double-digit returns in 2024. Private foundations averaged 10.3% gains, while community foundations averaged 11%. Over 10 years, both have maintained returns near 7%, providing stability and restoring spending power after recent economic uncertainty. These results may allow many institutions to maintain or even expand their grant-making levels, supporting nonprofits with greater predictability. For organizations dependent on endowment income, such performance can help smooth the impact of market cycles. Meanwhile, in the tech sector, EdTech Innovation Hub reports that OpenAI has launched a $50 million People First AI fund, and that has just been announced this week. So for fundraisers, this will be new news for many of you. The fund is designed to support nonprofits and community groups developing AI solutions in healthcare, education, economic opportunity, and community organizing. Applications will open September 8th, just a few days from now, and close October 8th, with awards expected by this year's end. According to OpenAI, the fund was informed by recommendations from its independent nonprofit commission, which called for targeted investments in mission-driven innovation. The initiative signals a step towards structured philanthropic involvement in AI development. Another story raising questions about future support for nonprofits comes from Washington, and it's likely the biggest news story for many who rely on aggregated funds for their support. The Combined Federal Campaign, the government's long-running workplace giving program for federal employees, has been placed on hold for 2025. On August 26th, the Office of Personnel Management, which governs the fund, issued a stop work order, halting preparations for this year's campaign, which was scheduled to launch September 2nd. The Washington Post reports that the program has raised nearly $9 billion since its creation in 1961, and it's funded largely by fees from participating charities, not taxpayer dollars. The pause has left many nonprofits uncertain about a key revenue source. Some organizations, including St. Jude Children's Hospital and Doctors Without Borders, had already paid fees to participate, expecting to begin receiving donations this fall. According to MSN News, there is an active debate within the administration about whether to end the campaign altogether, a move that could sharply reduce workplace giving to thousands of charities, especially smaller community organizations. Now, as we pass from this week's hot topics into something that's central to many of our work, to many of our organizations and their work day to day in fundraising, we have a conversation with today's guest, Ruthie Giles, a nationally recognized expert in prospect development and the author of a new book, Prospect Management: The Essential Guide. This book, just released by Stoppel Analytics Group, offers a detailed roadmap for building effective prospect management systems. It covers topics like pipeline tracking, portfolio analysis, metrics, and the role of prospect management in fundraising strategy. She draws on her experience leading prospect research and management teams at institutions including the University of New Hampshire Foundation and Mount Holyoke. In our conversation, she shares practical insights for fundraisers and advancement professionals on how prospect management can improve efficiency and strengthen donor relationships. Here is that discussion. Maybe begin by thanking you very much for taking time to talk about your new book, and congratulations on the publication.
Thank you.
So this is, first of all, it's called Prospect Management, the Essential Guide for a High-Functioning Nonprofit Management System. Is that correct?
Yes, it is a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. So let's start there then. How did you come up with the title?
I knew I wanted it to say prominently prospect management because there's a lot of books, as I'm sure everyone well knows, out there on different aspects of fundraising, but not one that really encompasses prospect management itself. So I didn't want to bury the lead. And I wanted to say more than just prospect management because there is prospect management in the for-profit sector. So I wanted to make sure we differentiated it so that people understood, even people were just scanning through like Amazon or something and doing a search for a book, that this was not a for-profit book. This is specifically for nonprofits. So, that's sort of how we, the title got a little bit longer, and then I'm like, okay, so it's for nonprofits, but it's also for high functioning. Like we're moving people from the land of time before prospect management or shops that don't quite have it yet to let's get you where you need to go through prospect management so that you can be much more higher functioning than you currently are. Not that shops aren't high functioning, but like this takes them to the next level.
Right. And for many people listening and watching this, they may not be in one of those shops, or they may even need some definition. So let's start with the simplest, which is what is prospect management today?
Prospect management today, I have to back it up and say what it used to be. Like we used to talk about things like pipeline management, like moves management. And I think people thought of it as a straight shot of like, we're going to talk to you about, we're going to find out who you are, we're going to talk to you a little bit, we're going to get the gift and shoot you straight through all these little categories, all the way to get the gift. And prospect management is more than just stuffing someone through one end of a habit trail and then watching the hamster run through, right? It's understanding how to manage the entire relationship. Not that gift officers aren't doing that, but in a way that we are recording all the differences of the relationship. So, because we're not just moving them forward, sometimes they move back. People have instances in life where we're moving that relationship forward and something happens. Maybe they're selling their business or they have a personal life event that changes things. So those relationships aren't straight line. And prospect management, using it in a way that we're using our database to record everything and report on everything, we can see the entire relationship from soup to nuts and all the sort of side journeys in between. So I see prospect management as a much more complex thing than I think people had previously, in the early days.
And as you talk about that, I'm sure you're speaking because you speak at a number of conferences and you've worked in a number of shops as well as a consultant today. You run into shops that not only have a problem with defining those terms, but applying them. And it's not always a matter of scale, I assume. It's also a matter of intention. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I've run into shops where, at big shops or small shops, we're like, oh, we have prospect management. And I said, great, tell me about it. And they will tell me, I'm like, so what you're telling me is you have codes in your database to record information, but the process to manage that information and understand how to create the strategies and the intention of moving someone wherever they need to be moved as, with a very donor-centric approach, sometimes that's not being applied. And sometimes really small shops are doing it great because I find the smaller the shop, the easier it is for them to get very personal. Well, they really know their donors really well because it's a smaller pool. And I find big shops that do it really well because they've done this for so long and they've well-oiled machines. But, vice versa, I've walked into large shops that, they have some of the coding, they think they're doing prospect management. I'm like, you are, but you're doing it from 15 years ago. We're going to move you into the present day and give you the entire package of all that is prospect management, all the bells and whistles, not just the coding.
And I do want to dive into the book itself to see how you guide us through that process. But let me just ask the big question, which is why is that important? I mean, you've kind of hit a glancing blow at that in what you just said. But for those who haven't developed a prospect management plan and system and staffed it appropriately and then report out on it consistently and well, they may just say, well, why do we need to do this? So, what is your answer to that question?
I mean, why wouldn't you need to do this? We live in a world now where people expect certain things, right? You go on to Netflix and it tells you exactly what it thinks you want to watch. And it's often really right because it's got algorithms working in the background and it's got all sorts of data it's collecting along the way. And when you go on to Amazon or Facebook, they're suggesting things for you that very much match your behaviors up to that point because they have so much working in the background. And these are big companies with big budgets, right? Small community, small nonprofits, like they don't have that kind of budget. But we can still mirror that to a point because we know our people and we can scale it down. But we have to do that with intention and with an end goal in mind, like where are we trying to get them? Because our donors expect us to know who they are, expect that we know certain things about them because they're getting this from every place else in their world. They talk to Siri or Alexa or whoever they talk to, and those things seem to know a lot about them. So why shouldn't we, the organizations that they've invested their time, their money, they volunteer, their effort, they might be alumni, they might be grateful patients, whatever they are. So they're expecting us to know who they are. So creating a system to manage those relationships, because we aren't just managing one or two, we're managing hundreds and thousands of relations, like hundreds to thousands of relationships. Some people have hundreds of thousands of relationships, very big organizations, I suppose. But when you're trying to manage those relationships, you really need to be thoughtful about it and have that information well curated so that your gift officers can go out there and talk to those donors and not ever be caught on their back foot, right? You don't want to walk into a donor conversation and say, how are your kids? And then find out that something very unfortunate had perhaps happened. And then you're backpedaling, and that's an incredibly uncomfortable place for your gifted officer to be. So you always want them to know what's going on as best you can, and providing them with as much data, as much research, and as much strategy before they get in front of that person, be it in front of, meaning a phone call, a Zoom, or actually in person. Prepares them for whatever instance could happen during that conversation. And they are savvy enough as gift officers who know what they're doing and they know their craft that they can take the conversation whatever direction they need to because they have enough information in the background and because they've looked at the data and because people like myself as prospect management folks have prepared them for that. We are their strategy, we are their tactic person, and we make sure that when they go out there on the front lines, they are ready for whatever's coming their way.
It really does sound like there are two big pillars here. There are probably more, but two big pillars that you've just highlighted, which is one is the use of technical systems to support that plan and that approach, but the other is making sure that people understand the system. So we're not relying on just the tech, we're relying on the people and people
Right.
who are bought in and well prepared to engage with donors and meet them where they are, not just where we want them to be. This is so important. Can you take us on kind of a guided tour through the book? Many, of course, will not have seen it yet, so just pretend we're opening it up. What do you take us through on that journey?
I mean, I being a big nerd myself, I love a good origin story. So I start at the beginning. I say, here is where we started. We started as prospect research, and then out of research, how did prospect management grow? Where are the origins of that? And what are the definitions? Where did the definition of sort of pipeline management and moves management start? And now what are we looking at as prospect management? And then I include like how other people have defined it and then how I define it because I'm a little more irreverent than most people. And then moving them forward from like, okay, now that we've defined it, let's explain a little bit about how it works. Not just the coding, but like let's really back it up. Like if you're going to be incorporating this into your nonprofit, how do you do that? From the beginning all the way to the end. And anyone should be able to pick up this book and pick and choose where they start in the book and get what they need from it. You don't necessarily have to go beginning to end if you already have stuff implemented. But I'm assuming when I wrote the book, I'm like, I want to make sure anyone can pick up this book and do it. So it starts with like how to, what is the difference between prospect research and prospect management? And then what is project management based on? What are the for-profit techniques that we're incorporating? And those are lead management, total quality management, a little bit of inventory management, things like that. And then explaining the difference between mission goals, the difference between strategy and tactics. People use those words interchangeably. They're not the same thing. They are, the two very distinct things. Strategies, overall, tactics are the small tools that get you to get to that strategy. So explaining that so that they can understand that and go back into their shops and talk about it is, with confidence. And then what are the advantages of it? I talk about that because sometimes in a small shop or in a shop that this is newer to, you have to sell this to your boss. You have to say, why am I going to take the time to do all this work? And you have to explain it to them in a way that they can understand and they can't say no to. So, how do you explain what are the advantages? What are you going to get as an organization? What are you going to get out of this as a fundraiser? And what are you going to get out of this for your reporting your data needs? What are those things and how is this going to help everything and everybody? And then I delve a little bit into change management because that is important. Because as you're implementing new systems, it's change, and we all know that people hate change. Not everyone hates change, but no one ever says, "Oh, I love change. Let's change everything all the time, every day." Like no one is that person. No one is that or that crazy. So, and then from there, I talk about how to start planning your project management system, from gathering information, doing a needs assessment, looking at your database, defining all your terminology, putting it into play, how to write things up so that you're presenting it to people and presenting it to your team and rolling it out, and then how to keep it, how to keep the maintenance of it over time. Like you're not just creating this and then putting it on a shelf and saying, go forth and conquer, good luck, folks. You're saying, we've created the system, now let's make sure that we maintain it, we improve it, and that's the total quality management piece. Like we're maintaining, we're improving, and we're making sure that over time as the world changes, we're changing our system with it. So.
I have so many questions in there. One thing I'll have to say is that when you said nobody says I love change, I say that all the time. So it's maybe I am crazy, but I know what you mean. It's hard for people to make sometimes even small adjustments when they think their process is working. And you're nodding, so I suspect you're reading what I'm really saying there. Can you talk about that a little bit? How sometimes you encounter shops that maybe they're meeting their goals, that bottom line. And there are a lot of people who work to make that possible. But if that's the one measure and they're meeting it, there might be some resistance to implementing a system that asks them to make adjustments to their behaviors that might bring them more revenue. It might make their donors more happy, but you run into that psychological barrier. How much do you talk about that in the book, or how much can you share with us about encountering that and overcoming that barrier?
I go into that a little bit as I'm talking about change management. I don't delve deeply into that because this is sort of an overall comprehensive book, but it doesn't go deep into too many, like it goes deep into some topics, but not into every topic. But when it comes to changing things, and I've encountered this, some people are like, well, we have project management, it's working perfectly. We don't need that. We'll do something else. Like, okay. And then I start asking them questions. Like, so how are you doing this? How are you doing that? To sort of like, not that I'm, trying to cause trouble, but I want to make sure I'm like, if you tell me that your project management system is perfect, you have everything you need, I just need to do a little quality check to make sure, like, is it giving everything you need, or is there something we can do to enhance this so that work can be more streamlined, that things can be more efficient, more effective, that not only are you meeting your goals, but maybe even exceeding them? Like, who wouldn't want to do that, right? And I think, like, from the financial goal perspective, like, we all want to exceed the financial goal that we have each year. But there's other goals that we have, like how many people are we meeting with? How big is our outreach to our constituency? Are we seeing enough people? Are we uncovering those hidden gems that we're always thinking are out there? There's always that moment of there's gold in them there hills. But if we're not seeing everyone, if we're just sticking with the same portfolio or the same relative portfolio and not exploring other areas within our constituency, we're going to miss some really amazing people. So that's part of what project management is, to always be saying, check out these folks. Let's try to, qualify these folks. Let's try to look at someone differently. Just because you think remember I worked at one shop and I uncovered someone who worked in the video gaming industry, and they're like, and I'm like, what do you mean up? Like, the video gaming industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And this person is very high in the company they are, and we're not paying attention to her also as a woman. I thought that was interesting that this person was a woman. And they just sort of shrugged it off. I'm like, you are missing a massive opportunity. As you know, this is a female leader in an industry that's male dominated, and it's a very wealthy industry. So I kept sort of at every meeting bringing that name up, and every meeting they would shoot it down, and I left, and I don't know if they ever saw her. I hope they did.
Well, yeah, I hope
but that was
that
like,
came around.
Yeah, I mean, this is like 15 years ago, so I don't know what happened with her. Hopefully they changed their tune on that particular type of topic, but
yeah,
at any rate.
That's painful to hear, but it's not uncommon either. I mean, you're using just one example of something that plays out in lots of different ways in lots of different places. One element of this might also be when you do commit to the kind of systemic approach that you're suggesting here, and I'm sure that you're giving us ample evidence of and strategies for in the book. Does it enable us to better project? Because what you just talked about, for example, with a person who's in an industry that's doing brilliantly, but also over the last 15 years has really grown. So 15 years ago, that might have required a person to be more broad-minded about which sectors of the economy offer the greatest opportunity, not just immediately, but over the long term. So if we're doing prospect management well, the way you're suggesting in the book, does it help us also to project for the future? So we aren't just hitting this year's goal, but the goal is 5 years and 10 years from now.
That is exactly what I'm trying to set people up for through prospect management. And that's what I'm hoping that this book will help people do. Because the world changes, and anyway, as you well know, and I'm sure other folks listening well know, like, it changes so fast now. We have to keep up. Everything is sort of accelerating at an exponential rate in certain areas, and we have to keep up with those changes. And historically, fundraising moves a little slower. Not all of it, and not everybody, but as a industry, we move a little slower than other organizations. So we have to try and keep up and think forward. Like, we're not just looking at our portfolio now for this year or now for this campaign, but I want them qualifying people who in 5 or 10 years are going to be their next wave of large donors. So there was a time when we didn't look at the millennials. Now they're finally old enough, people are taking them seriously, thank goodness. But now we want to start looking at the generations younger than that and say, who in 15 years is going to be our person or our people? So I want to be setting them up with those folks coming in, because if you're not cultivating those relationships now, you have to be. Because if you show up in 15 years and say, hey, remember us? Like, they're already involved with something else, especially those younger generations who it matters to them, that engagement. Like, they're approaching it differently than the boomers and even myself, the Gen Xers. Like, they're approaching how they engage with things much differently. And we have to recognize that and meet that.
I do want to ask you about change again from a different lens, which is how this field has changed. You kind of alluded to that by talking about prospect management before and today. What kinds of changes are you seeing, and how much of those are informed by, as you alluded to before as well, the corporate sector? In other words, are we catching up? Is the nonprofit sector catching up and evolving? And are these kinds of approaches that you're suggesting in the book and you're suggesting with us today, are they going to enable us to catch up and be on par with our corporate brothers and sisters?
I mean, I think we are, as a sector, starting to catch up. I think some organizations are caught up and other ones are a little behind. Sometimes it depends on the staffing and budget. Like, if you're small staff, if you have a small budget, it's harder to catch up because you don't have the resources. You might have one person doing all of your prospect development, chief cook and bottle washer, right? And so for that one person to stay well informed, to stay up on industry trends, to bring that into play, like, it's difficult for one person to do that. But I do think that as an industry, we are starting to move forward, and we are starting to move forward faster. It's going to sound weird, but I think going through the pandemic helped, because we realized that, like, oh, if we can't see people in person, do sort of things the quote unquote old fashioned way, how do we adapt? And we had to adapt overnight in that, as we all remember. So I think we're a little better at adapting now because we've had to do it. We were, it came on so suddenly, no one saw it coming. Some people saw it coming, I suppose. But, as far as having to adapt to new ways of things. And we had to go into our database and say, okay, now how do I code Zoom meetings? And are those substantial meetings or are those video calls? Like, how do I count that as engagement and what type of engagement is it? So I think we're starting to think forward more. And I think over time we will get more caught up because we have to with our for-profit partners, because our constituents don't often differentiate. Like, I'm dealing right now with a nonprofit. Now I'm dealing with a for-profit. They're just dealing with organizations that matter to them, whether it's one that they're buying consumer goods from, or one that they have some sort of relationship because it's the museum that they like, or it is the national park that they go to. So
You've worked both in and with small shops and big shops, and
yep.
I don't know if it's easy to do, but can you give our viewers, our listeners, an example of how a place has applied some of the lessons that you're sharing in the book, and it really made a transformative effect? I mean, you can strip out the name of the institution, but if you can give us a concrete example, I think sometimes that enables people to go back with evidence and say, this is why we need to read this is why we need to do it, this is really what the difference it's going to make.
Yeah, there was one organization I was working with, possibly for. Names will be, we won't talk about names, but there's one organization I was working with, and bringing in project management, instituting a system with them. And there were some folks who were a little resistant to it because it was new, it was change. Those were the folks who don't like the change. There were some folks who were curious and wanted to know more. And when they started using what I had to offer them as far as strategy meetings and reporting tools and looking at their portfolio in a different way than just going through it line by line, name by name, they saw what I saw in the information and said, oh, if I just applied myself here, or if I just contacted these folks there, things could change in a good way. And this one particular gift officer understood very quickly what I was talking about and what I was offering in the way of project management and moving things forward. And she embraced it and just ran with it. And then the others saw the success she was having with some of the more challenging donors that had been in her portfolio, as well as some of the new donors who were brand new to her portfolio. And they saw her bringing in more gifts, not that it was super fast, but like a little faster, and that she was having more success with people who hadn't really had that much engagement because she was following a system to help, and we were tracking it. And once they saw that behavior and they saw her success, they're like, hey, I would like to try that as well. And I think sometimes it just takes that one person to sort of lead the pack and everyone can see what's happening. And then the rest came along, and they were starting to, while I was working with them, have more success and be a little more strategic about how they were dealing with certain people. And they were looking towards those folks who didn't fit sort of the typical mold, but there was something about them, much like that one I mentioned earlier, who was who'd worked in the gaming industry. But they were looking at people who were a little outside of the realm of what they typically looked at and said, there is potential here, and this person might in 10, 20 years be our biggest donor. So they were thinking forward, which was great. So, and I know they've been successful since then, since I've moved on from that organization, working with that organization. So
one thing I like to ask everybody I interview is about the one thing. So if people were to take away one thing from this conversation, from this book, from all your work, and start with that one thing right now that could make the biggest difference, what would that one thing be?
only one thing.
You feel free to make it two or three things, but just whatever you think is the greatest takeaway, as well as an appetizer for really applying themselves to the rest of the lessons here.
I mean, I think really just being forward thinking, but never losing sight of that these are our donors, these are our constituents, these are the people who matter, and that we matter to them. And we matter to them for various reasons, whether they're an alum, whether they're a member, whether we are part of their community, or like a community organization that they use within their community to better their world, better their lives. So we have to be respectful of that. And I think following a system that helps us grow the relationships, in a way that makes sense, not just for us, because we have our financial goals and all that, but there's other goals. We want to grow our community of constituents. And I think it matters to be very donor centric while this is a very systematic process that I've put forward. And I pepper that throughout the book, that donor centric matters, because it does. It can't not matter, right?
Thank you for all of this. I appreciate it. And if people want to get a hold of the book, how can they do that? How can they learn more?
The book is available on Amazon. Just either Google my name or Google Prospect Management. It should come right up. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all this. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Our thanks again to Ruthie for that interview and for her book. A couple last news items before we close out today. First, in the spirit of what Ruthie shared about younger donors and meeting them where they are, Mr. Beast, aka Jimmy Donaldson, and Mark Rober, together as Team Water, their campaign has succeeded in raising over $40 million in the last 30 days for water aid to bring clean water to over 2 million people. If you're not familiar with this campaign, it could be that you're not looking down those channels where they have successfully generated lots of interest, especially among younger and digital donors. We'll have more reporting on this story on a forthcoming program. Also, in a late-breaking addition to this week's top gifts, the Chronicle Philanthropy reported in just the last couple of hours that Tom Golisano, who has given over $500 million to 125 nonprofits in the last year alone, has just pledged $50 million to Kaleida Health in support of specialized pediatric care at the hospital there, which will now be renamed in his honor. Coming up next in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, this Thursday, September 4th, How to Raise hosts Ellen Bristol and Dr. Courtney Ladisaw of Bristol Strategy Group. In their session, Capital Campaign, Put on Your Own Oxygen Mask First, they'll share a systematic approach to assessing your organization's readiness before launching a major campaign, helping you identify gaps, engage stakeholders, and set your campaign up for success. This Friday, September 5th, the PM Podcast welcomes David Callahan, a name I'm sure you know. He's an author, founder and editor of Inside Philanthropy and Blue Tent, and we will be discussing his reporting, his books, and what his work has revealed to him about the changing landscape of philanthropy and politics. And you can catch that wherever you like to listen. And of course, for the latest news and views, you can join us here on Frontlines of Social Good every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Catch past programs on any of these shows anytime at DonorSearch.net, the home of our longtime sponsor, DonorSearch, the global leader in AI-powered fundraising intelligence solutions. So until next time, take care and do good.